Registrar, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed Sahab, Director, Center for Online and Distance Education, Professor Razallah Khan Sahab, Head, Department of English, Professor K. Nagendra, Dr. Miraj Ahmed, Cultural Coordinator, CAC, the Organizing Secretary, Dr. Khairunisa, guests from within and outside Maulana Azad National Urdu University, the organizers, the scholars, the students, the faculty and staff of Maulana Azad National Urdu University who have joined here in person in the library auditorium, and to everybody else who have joined us online through the live stream. Good morning and a very hearty welcome to each one of you. As we start the one-day national seminar on Jane Austen at 2:50, Relevance, Readings and Retellings, I would like to tell you how this whole idea started. My teacher, Professor E. Nageshwara Rao, is here in our midst, along with a number of eminent speakers at the round table. We have Professor C.R. Visveswara Rao here. Sir is the Vice Chancellor, former Vice Chancellor, Nellore University. We have Professor G. Mohan G. Ramanan Sir, Sudha Ma'am, we have Professor Kulkarni, we have Professor Shugufta with us. These are all our eminent speakers. Some other eminent speakers will join us shortly. These are speakers at the roundtable session that will start a little later. We also have in our midst Dr. Rama Rao, former Director, IMC. Sir made a very beautiful sketch of Jane Austen when he learned that we are organizing a seminar on Jane Austen, and he will gift it to the chief guest in a little while from here. So coming back to the idea of holding this seminar, my teacher, Professor E. Nageshwara Rao, has gifted me hundreds of books over more than 3 decades now. And when one fine day, sir asked me if I could lend a copy of Pride and Prejudice, the hard copy, I scrambled to sir's home to give the copy to him, and then I learned about this year, 16th of December, happening to be the 250th birth anniversary of Jane Austen. And then I discussed with my colleagues here at the school in the Department of English, and we thought of hosting this seminar. Keeping in view the vacation time, next week all of us proceed on vacation. Most universities across India have already declared the winter vacation. We thought most of our events would be online. The online events constitute the research paper presentations, readings from Jane Austen's novels, retellings of Pride and Prejudice, either as a prequel or as a sequel. We have some student events also, and for the first time, we have included the students of the distance mode education of Maulana Azad National Urdu University. The quiz was an in-person event. I would like to announce the winners here. They will get their prizes later. The winners in the quiz are, first prize goes to Ani Sunisa, second goes to Shriya Khan, both PhD scholars. The third prize goes to Ghulam Samdani. He's an undergrad student with us. Then, in which the first prize goes to Adnan, second goes to Madiha, and the third goes to Suhail. I am yet to receive the list of prize winners for the event quotable course. This was also an online event. There will be a movie screening today in the afternoon. And after the inaugural session, we have a roundtable discussion where I have already listed out the names of the eminent speakers who would be addressing us. 2 names that I didn't mention are the names of Dr. Asma Rashid, who has just joined us, and Dr. Siddharth Satpathy, who would be joining us shortly. A quick look at the speakers in the roundtable conference. Professor E. Nageshwara Rao, retired from Osmania University. Professor C.R. Visveswara Rao, former Vice Chancellor, VSU Nellore. Professor Mohan G. Ramanan, retired from the University of Hyderabad. Professor Parimala Kulkarni is heading the Department of English at Osmania University. Dr. Shilpa Anand is from BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. Dr. Siddharth Satpathy is a faculty member at the University of Hyderabad. Dr. Asma Rashid is from the English and Foreign Languages University. And from our own university, we have Professor Panchanan Mohanty and Professor Shugufta Shine taking part in the roundtable discussions on Jane Austen and her relevance today. So I once again thank each one of you for sparing some time and being a part of this celebration. Thank you so much.
Vice Chancellor, Professor Syed Ainul Hassan. The anthem beautifully embodies the spirit, vision, and rich cultural ethos of our esteemed institution, with a special resonance of the Urdu language. I request the technical team to play the university anthem.
ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। आओ सफ़र यहाँ से करे आसमान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। इल्मो कमाल फज़लो शेयारो शूर तक फैली है दिल नवाज महक दूर दूर तक। मिलता यहाँ निसाब है सारे जहान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। हर नक्शो रंगो बू से करो अपनी गुफ्तगू। आजाद दरसगाह की है ये भी जुस्तजू। सब फासला मिटाते चलो दरमियान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ग़र्बो जुनूब से हो के शर्क़ो वो शुमाल से आगे बढ़ो ख़याल मिला दो ख़याल से। चर्चा हो कायनात में हिंदुस्तान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। फसले सदा बहार से बस्ती बसी रहे। मिलकर दुआ करो कि ये खेती हरी रहे। साया रहे सरों पे किसी साहिबान का। आओ सफ़र यहाँ से करे आसमान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का। ये बाबे शहरे इल्म है उर्दू ज़बान का।
Take this opportunity to invite Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, Registrar, Manu, to address the gathering.
Honorable Vice Chancellor of Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Excellency Gareth Owen, British Deputy High Commissioner for Telangana, Dean School of Languages, Professor Gulfisa Habib, Director CDOE, Professor Razaullah Khan, and distinguished colleague, participants, distinguished guest, Professor Rama Rao, former Director IMC, and our online participants. Indeed, it's a great pleasure to take part in this national seminar celebrating 258th birth anniversary of Jane Austen, one of the most influential writers in English literature. The fact that her work are still read and discussed today shows her lasting relevance in the literature. Although Jane Austen wrote about the limited social world of Regency England, her novels speaks to readers across the time and cultures. Her themes, love and marriage, social class, morality, and women's choices remain meaningful even today. Though, through irony and keen observations, she questioned social norms and highlighted women's issues and women's strength within social constraint. The seminar theme, Relevance, Reading, and Reimagining, reflects how Austen's work continues to inspire new interpretations and adaptation all through the literatures. From scholarly readings to films and modern retellings, her stories continue to reach new audiences. This seminar provides a good platform, a valuable space to engage with Austen's as a living literary presence. I congratulate the organizers, the School of Languages, the CDOE, and the Department of English. These all three are organizing this seminar in collaboration, and a good number of the participants who are participating through online mode, our scholars, our participants, our teachers. And I also do hope that a good number of participants are going through refresher course in comparative literature at our MMTC. They will also join and they will be part of this seminar. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words and continued support for academic and cultural initiatives at Manu. It is now my privilege to invite Professor Muhammad Razaullah Khan, Director, Center for Distance and Online Education, Manu, to introduce our chief guest and share a brief note about the university.
Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Syed Anwar Sahab, today's chief guest, Gareth Owen, the Deputy High Commissioner to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Registrar of the University, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, the Dean and the organizer of this seminar, Professor Gulfisa Habib, dignitaries, delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my privilege to introduce today the Gareth Owen, the chief guest of this function. Mr. Gareth Owen started as the Deputy High Commissioner to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana in September 2022. He is responsible for all aspects of the UK's engagement in two Telugu states, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. As the Deputy High Commissioner, his role includes promoting business and trade links, strengthening scientific and education cooperation, and working with partners to tackle climate change and ensure a transition to clean and sustainable growth. Prior to this appointment, Gareth led to work on securing the UK's ASEAN dialogue partner status in 2020-21. He was also part of the cross-government team that developed the Indo-Pacific TILT framework which was published in March 2021 in the UK government's Integrated Review. Mr. Gareth has worked in Russia, Armenia, Iran, and Azerbaijan for the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office and has expertise in number of areas including building science and innovation partnership, strengthening commercial collaborations, working to tackle climate change, supporting economic development to reduce poverty. He studied economics and development at University College London and the School of Oriental and African Studies. He is married with 2 children. Outside of work, he enjoys cycling, playing bridge, and trying new cuisines. This was all about the chief guest. Now it's my duty to bring him to the fore in brief what Manu is doing. Manu, through its 8 schools, disseminating knowledge in Urdu language as per the mandate that entrusted with in 1998 Act of Parliament. Manu has a dual mode presence, and this is the only university which is having national jurisdiction offering courses on regular mode on campus as well as in distance mode. And in distance mode, we will be offering 3rd mode very soon, that is online. Right now, we are having open distance learning programs offer. And in that, enrollment of English is highest. Number of students enrolling in different programs as subject-wise, almost equal to Urdu. Though it is Urdu university, but enrollment in different programs in the subject or course of English is almost equal. Manu has a unique distinction of inclusivity. It is Urdu university, but at the same time, the enrollment in different programs in regular as well as in distance mode is almost 50% for girls and boys. So this is a unique, feat the Manu achieved, inclusivity. Since these are the days of multidisciplinary learning and multidisciplinary working and collaboration, so this is the right platform that a person from commerce is addressing the persons who are hailing from English. So this is, in fitness of things. I would also like to share here, there are certain things that makes Manu a distinct university. Though it is Urdu university, but it is into engineering, it is into management, it is into mass communication, and also these streams of arts and sciences. So we welcome you here on this, occasion, and I hope that you will, see number of participants in the next round table, which we are going to have after this function. Thank you so much, sir.
For offering a lucid overview of the university. Ladies and gentlemen, we now proceed to the felicitation of our esteemed chief guest, Mr. Gareth Wynne Owen, British Deputy High Commissioner for Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. May I request Dr. Miraj Ahmed, Cultural Coordinator, Cultural Activity Center, Manu, to kindly present the memento to the chief guest. Thank you, sir. I further request Professor Rama Rao, former director, IMC Manu, and an accomplished artist to honor the chief guest with a pencil sketch of Jane Austen, personally sketched by him for this occasion to commemorate today's event. As ma'am mentioned earlier, we are deeply grateful to Professor Rama Rao for this generous and thoughtful gesture. Thank you. It is now my privilege to invite our chief guest, Mr. Gareth Wynne Owen, to deliver the inaugural address. So please.
Thank you very much, and it's an honour, as always, to be back at Manu. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Thank you, Professor Habib, for inviting me. I always enjoy visiting this brilliant university. The topics and discussions you have are always fascinating. And today, on the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth, it's a very, very special moment. A lot has already been said about Jane Austen. A lot has been already said about the impact of her work. She really was someone, an author who at the time broke some norms, not only in what she wrote, but also in terms of her role as a female writer. She was definitely ahead of her time. As we all know, as we would all agree, her works still have influence today. I have 2 children, they are 12 and 14. Most of the time, their reading is influenced by Harry Potter. But you ask them to read Jane Austen, and it's something they enjoy. And that, for me, tells you a lot about what she wrote and how she wrote it as well. She, as we've heard already, there was lots of wit, subtle satire in her work. There was a lot of love and class issues, but she also discussed some very difficult issues in terms of the role of women in society 200 years ago, and also the expectations. And I think we all love the characters she created. My wife and I, on our morning walk this morning, we were talking about Pride and Prejudice. We were talking about some of the characters she created, and unfortunately our walk was not long enough to go past Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Collins. We didn't even get onto the daughters or other characters as well. Her characters were so rich and so diverse that she blended them together, which, as we know, created novels, created pictures that are still relevant today. And you think about this enduring legacy that she created, books written 200 years ago that are still being adapted time and time again for television and for film and for theatre. They're not books that are now on a dusty shelf, never to be picked up again. They're still being picked up today by children, by adults. They're still being looked at by directors and producers about what's our adaptation of what Jane Austen wrote 200 years ago. And it's really a delight to be here to talk about one of the most eminent British authors. You think about Jane Austen, you think about Charles Dickens. You can probably stop there. There are many others, but certainly from writers from centuries ago, she's such an important part of UK literature, but also now global literature. Her influence is worldwide. The issues she wrote about are still valid today as they were 200 years ago. So thank you, Manu, for having this day to not only celebrate one of the UK's greatest authors, but to carry on that discussion about the importance of what she wrote, not only 200 years ago, but also today as well. Because it's quite clear, if you look at what's happening around the globe at the moment, some of those issues remain critical. So thank you all very much. Thank you all for attending this event today, and good luck with this seminar. I know that, as always, it will be a brilliant day. So thank you very much.
We sincerely thank you, sir, for your erudite and insightful address. Your reflections on Jane Austen's legacy have greatly enriched this academic spirit of the seminar. I now have the honor of inviting the president of this session, Professor Syed Ainul Hasan, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Manu, to deliver the presidential remarks.
the name of the one who bestowed life and wisdom upon us. Now our chief guest, Gareth Owen, Deputy High Commissioner, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, Professor Habib, Professor Razaullah Khan, host of participants, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys. This is a wonderful occasion to hear something from a native speaker, Mr. Gareth, a renowned author, novelist. And if I recall, in 90s, we borrowed so many things from British cinema and British industry. And there was, one borrowed series of episodes that was Pride and Prejudice. I was very fond of Pride and Prejudice, and a house of 7 or 5 sisters, some very close to their parents, very dear to their parents, and some of them very naughty. So things are happening within the household. And then finally it was touching upon the zenith of romanticism. That's a quality of the entire thing was that it never deviated the path of romanticism. Britain, when she opened her eyes in this world, it was almost, it was French Revolution happened, and then the side effect and after effect of French Revolution could be seen everywhere throughout the Europe. And realists came forward and started talking about the objectives of life and realities of life, how to lead a life, leaving behind the vast nature and man's affiliation to nature, and then they creating an ecosystem. Even, if you recall him in Mirza Ghalib, that time said कि साए की तरह साथ फिरें सर्वो सनोबर, तू इस कदे दिलकश से जो गुलजार में आए. Life was given to each and every part of this globe, whether mountain or fountains, trees, flora and fauna, all were seen alive. कभी पहाड़ बीमार हो जाएगा, कभी समंदर सिकुड़ जाएगा. So all these things were happening, and she continued to follow that path. And wonderful romanticism. But unfortunately, immediately the arrival, she died in, 22? 17? She was 41 years old, I think. In the prime of, if you don't call it prime of youth, it was, almost prime. 41 years. She wrote, several novels, And she was, she started criticism also. But, with the arrival of Victorian era, and then Matthew Arnold coming to the close circle of elites, And then he became the initiator of criticism. Whereas she started criticism. She started criticism. She wrote several articles. and about poets and authors and the great men, you see, their works, their ideas. So she was open to receive things, from other sides also. Very, very open person. But very, and this is very unfortunate that she died, She started losing her, weight, and then something chronic happened, and slowly and gradually, and last piece she wrote, and then she died. And, many of, world's best authors and poets died in the prime of their youth. John Keats, not very far. He died, you see, after a gap of, say, 5 years. He died. He was hardly 26. And then, you see, Shelley died. He was also a great poet, And then, of course, Fitzgerald, we say Umar Khayyam's translation of Fitzgerald and the flowery, and he also died, very early. 46 years old he was, and then he died. And look at here, this side, Parveen Ehtasami, at the age of 25. Farrukhzad, 32. And then Quratul Ain Tahira, also 35. So all these ladies, they gave up this task, very early. Now today we remember that the kind of work she left behind. And most important is Sense and Sensibility. And later on, many authors wrote on the same line, you see. Sensibility, sensuality, and I don't know, blah, blah, so many things. And then the English professors must be knowing it. Even philosophers came to this line. And then Simin Danishwar, very, very close to Jane, very close to Jane. Suvashun, highly symbolic one, Suvashun, and then Jazire Sargardani. These are, masterpieces they produced very early, in their early life. One must appreciate. But what happened? She lived in poverty. Her brother ultimately, he made a house, but somehow she was living in poverty. The only support was her pen. When she started writing, you see, all publishers started, storming. And then one after another, you see, they wanted her to write more and more, you see, and to publish and to gather wealth. But poor Jane, died. Last letter she wrote, and everything goes off the line. So we must remember, and we should remember those also who really made a mark in this world and left this world to continue their legacy. I'm sure the brainstorming sessions and the scholars will present very scholarly papers, and later on, see, I request that if it is published, more the merrier, and at least a larger audience will get to know what kind of writing it was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your visionary words and for your constant encouragement of literary and scholarly pursuits at Manu. As we draw this inaugural session to a close, I invite Professor K. Nagendra, Head, Department of English, Manu, to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Rahat. A very good morning to all. A respected Honorable Vice Chancellor, esteemed Chief Guest, distinguished dignitaries on the dais, learned scholar, faculty members, research scholars, students, and dear participants. On behalf of the Department of English, SLL&I, Maulana Azad National Urdu University, it is my proud privilege to propose vote of thanks on this momentous occasion of the one-day national seminar on Jane Austen at the rate of relevance, readings, and reimaginings. At the outset, I extend my profound gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Syed Ainul Hasan, for his gracious presence and for his visionary leadership, which continues to inspire academic excellence and intellectual engagement across the university. We are deeply honored by the august presence of our chief guest, Mr. Gareth Wyn Owen, the British High Commissioner for Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. We sincerely thank him for his illuminating inaugural address and for enriching the seminar with global perspective on literary legacy and cultural dialogue. Thank you, sir. I express my heartfelt thanks to Professor Gulfishan Habib, Dean School of Languages, Linguistics and Indology, for her thoughtful welcome address and constant academic support. I also gratefully acknowledge Professor S.K. Istiaq Ahmed, Registrar Manu, for his kind presence and encouraging words. Thank you, sir. Our sincere appreciation goes to Professor Muhammad Razaullah Khan, Director, Center for Distance and Online Education, for his insightful introduction of the chief guest and for highlighting the academic vision of Manu. I also thank Dr. Mehrez Ahmed and Dr. Rama Rao for graciously felicitating the chief guest and adding dignity to the inaugural proceedings. Thank you, sirs. This seminar would not have been possible without the collective efforts of the SLL&I, Center for Distance and Online Education, Department of English, and the Cultural Activity Center. I extend my sincere thanks to all the organizing committee members, faculty coordinators, and the technical team for their meticulous planning and seamless execution. I also place on record my appreciation for the MC, Ms. Rahat Firoz, for anchoring the program with poesy and professionalism, and to the participants whose presence and engagement truly give meaning to academic discourse. Finally, I thank each and everyone who has directly or indirectly contributed to the success of this seminar. Let us hope that the deliberation of the day will continue to inspire fresh scholarship and renowned engagement with Jane Austen's enduring legacy. Thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With the inaugural session now concluded, the seminar will continue with a roundtable discussion at the Conference Hall, School of Languages, Linguistics and Indology, commencing at 11:30 a.m. We sincerely look forward to your active participation. May I now request everyone to kindly stand up as we conclude the inaugural session with the national anthem. I invite the technical team to play the anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उत्कल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
We will now briefly break for tea. Kindly take a moment to refresh yourselves and we shall reconvene shortly.
we convene now for a rigorous academic engagement, a critical re-interrogation of Jane Austen's literary phenomenon. On the cusp of her 250th anniversary, this moment demands that we move beyond commemorative hagiography and subject her narrative ontology to renewed scrutiny under contemporary theoretical paradigms. In Northanger Abbey, Austen writes, a woman, especially if she have the misfortune of knowing anything, should conceal it as well as she can. So Austen highlights the absurd lengths to which women have had to disappear her intellectual authority. So an open round table like this we are having right now is a corrective measure, a space where knowing anything is celebrated rather than concealed. Our discussion is premised on assessing Austen's achievement not merely as a social satire, but as a sophisticated form of cultural technology that models the negotiation of intellectual agency within rigidly defined socioeconomic stratification. We are privileged to host a panel of unparalleled intellectual authority whose scholarly trajectories interject precisely at the nexus of the novel, critical theory, and comparative literary studies. Yeah. I shall now proceed with the formal introduction of our first speaker, Professor E. Nageshwara Rao. Our first luminary, retired professor of English and allied disciplines at Osmania University, and an elected member of the International Association of University Professors of English. Professor Rao's scholarly project is characterized by its breadth, encompassing authoritative monographs on major figures from Bernard Shaw to Ernest Hemingway, and foundational texts on literary criticism. His critical engagement extends to interdisciplinary discourse, notably his contribution on the restoration of Hyderabad lakes, published in the Annuals of New York Academy of Sciences. So, Professor Rao, the mic is over to you.
A very good morning to all the ardent Jainites assembled here this morning. First, I will take 1 or 2 minutes for some introductory remarks. This doesn't work? Okay. I'll take a couple of minutes for some introductory remarks. First, I wish to thank the authorities of this university and the organizers of this particular seminar for inviting me to participate in this function. I am particularly grateful to Dean Gulfishan Habib, who readily volunteered to host this national seminar when I mentioned 3 months ago that Jane Austen's 250th birth anniversary is coming up on December 16th. It looks as though this is not a national seminar only, but a festival. I have attended seminars, but they are of a different kind. People come and read their papers and then everything is finished. Here, it's a different kind of story. So it's like a festival. Such a variety of programs is arranged with meticulous planning and efficiency. Jane Austen certainly richly deserves a festival like this, and I feel proud to take part in it. Now, my presentation. I hope my presentation will not in any way change your opinion about me after listening to the introduction he gave. They have edited the biodata I supplied, and they chose certain things and left out certain other things. Now, Jane Austen's greatness would remain the same even if she wrote only Pride and Prejudice. That is my conviction. If she wrote only one novel and not the other 5 novels, would still be #1. She called it her darling child. This novel is her darling child. In any selection of 10 great novels in the world, in any language in the world, Pride and Prejudice will have a prominent place. Usually at the top of 10. You use the Google and you'll find it there. Another thing is, it is often only the only British novel included in such a list of 10 novels. From this you can understand how important Pride and Prejudice is for her collection. Now one thing, she wrote 6 novels, all of us know. These were written, she has only 6 years to write. Each year one novel. 6 creative years, and the rest of it, no. These 6 novels were in 2 groups actually. Pride and Prejudice, Northanger Abbey, Sense and Sensibility. And then there is a gap of 10 years to finish the others, Mansfield Park and Persuasion and whatever the other novel is. Okay? So, it was praised by authors, scholars, and common readers for over 2 centuries. It seems to me that Jane Austen wrote novels because it was a preferred genre in her time. Of aspiring writers in her time. If she had lived in the Elizabethan age, she probably would have written poetic dramas like Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Marlowe, and others, and made a mark. In fact, her affinity to Shakespeare was noted by Tennyson and Henry James. Henry James is the topmost man as far as fiction is concerned, and if Henry James says something, it should be taken as gospel truth. He was called post-Shakespeare by critical G.H. Lewis. The sparkling dialogues of Elizabeth and Darcy remind us of the witty exchanges of lovers in Shakespeare's romantic comedies, notably Benedict and Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing. Jane Austen's novels have a dramatic structure. The settings are carefully planned, the characters are introduced, they sing and dance. Elizabeth sings, Elizabeth dances. They eat and converse. Nothing else. Longbourn, Netherfield, Rosings, Pemberley, or some other locations where the action unfolds. Pride and Prejudice is in 3 parts. Originally, is in 3 parts. I think she called them volumes, perhaps. Suggesting the structure of a 3-act play. 3 parts, 3 acts. Edwin Muir, who wrote a book called The Structure of English, The Structure of the Novel, described Jane Austen's novels as dramatic novels. There is drama hidden here. Drama involves performance. Drama means that there is a stage where actors, people perform. Performance means enacting. Enacting. All the characters play their different roles in a convincing way. The novel begins with an amusing conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet about the new tenant of Netherfield Park. Mr. Bennet is good at dramatizing, I like that fellow. Mr. Bennet is good at dramatizing the scenes in which he appears. For instance, he announces the visit of Mr. Collins, his distant cousin, and as a successor, saying, he announces it to his family. 5 daughters and wife are there. When I'm dead, he says, he may, that means Collins may turn you all out of this house. It's a shocking statement to announce it to the family. Young girls are there, 5 girls. The family, particularly Mrs. Bennet, is shocked by his sudden announcement. She wants property, she wants house. So she was shocked. Now, let us look at the plot construction. Plot explains the causality, cause and effect, underlying different events in a story. For instance, Elizabeth visits Pemberley House, Darcy's home, unexpectedly. Her meeting with the housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, makes her change her opinion of Darcy. The news of the elopement of Lydia with Wickham is received by Elizabeth at Pemberley. This gives a chance to Darcy to save the Bennets from social stigma. In those days also, elopement is not condoned. Elopement is a social stigma. So they make it a marriage with Darcy's help, legitimate marriage. This gives a chance to Darcy to save the Bennets from social stigma. Darcy's secret intervention in this affair in London enhances Elizabeth's respect for him and paves the way for her to accept his proposal. Every incident is logically linked to the next one, thus ensuring a credible plot. There are no loose ends and everything is neatly summed up. In the last chapter, actually, all the loose ends are tied up. What happened to this lady, what happened to, for instance, Lady Catherine, and so they're all explained in the last chapter. Nothing is left to any guess, and everything is tied up. In the choice of appropriate words, Jane Austen is a precursor, in my opinion, of Gustave Flaubert. All of you must have heard of the French writer Gustave Flaubert, author of Madame Bovary, and Gustave Flaubert is famous for his phrase, le mot juste. If there are French speakers here, I hope I have pronounced it correctly. Le mot juste in French. When he was writing, he was struggling to get the right word in the right spot, exact word, the precise word for each sentence, for each phrase. The same thing was done much earlier by Jane Austen. That is my contention. Open at random any page in this novel, read a couple of lines, you will find that the words are fixed. No, you can't substitute, take out one word and put your own word there. She has found out the right word in the right spot, exact word. Le mot just means the exact word which the French writer did, but earlier than that, she did it in English. She's a precursor of Gustave Flaubert, who struggled for le mot just in French. One example, Lydia was Lydia still, I'm quoting. Lydia was Lydia still, untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless. She turned from sister to sister, demanding their congratulations. You know, Lydia comes from London after marrying with Wickham, and then she wants her sisters to congratulate her. And she's just the same as she was before. I have a secret liking for Lydia. People condemn her, but I think I have a liking for her. This is after return from London, where she married Wickham. The author's verbal ingenuity is evident throughout the novel. You can open any page and read and find out whether the words there are exact or not. One other small example I give you is describing, is this better? Describing Mrs. Bennet, he says, she is occasionally nervous, invariably silly. Can you change any word in this description of Mrs. Bennet? Occasionally nervous, invariably silly. Such a precision, such exactness of the choice of words. Okay. In fiction, this is a new point. In fiction, there are four kinds of prose: description, narration, commentary, and dialogue. We can describe this room, people, and all that. That's relatively easy. Next, narration, going on telling what happened. And then commentary. Henry Fielding is very notorious or famous, depending on your orientation, on commentary. Between parts of this novel, like Tom Jones, for instance, he has got commentary, he explains. And then other he comes and says, this happened because of this, or this is going to happen, and so on. Now, that shows the inability of the writer, perhaps, or an inability of the novelist to put things in the proper perspective. Why should the author give commentaries between one part and another part. He does it. So commentary is also relatively easy, but dialogue is a difficult thing. I think writing dialogue is the acid test of a writer. If you can compose dialogue which is convincing, which is natural, which is acceptable, then you are a successful writer. And unfortunately, the word dialogue is often used by the cinema people, and then it has lost its original flavor. I hate that use of dialogue. The dialogue that is used by Shakespeare, the dialogue that was written by Jane Austen, that is great. Now, writing a dialogue, there's a book called Fictional Speech, and there the writer discusses this writing of dialogue. Who are the great masters in the writing of dialogue? Okay. I got the first warning. If you want further proof, I can't read out from the novel. The dialogues between Darcy and Elizabeth are examples of that. You can refer to that page, chapter 58, for instance. And then now let us look at the title, The Pride and Prejudice. People take it for granted, especially casual writers, casual readers think, oh, pride, oh, Darcy is proud. Pride refers to Darcy. And prejudice, Jane Austen, prejudice, Elizabeth, she's prejudiced against Darcy. So they equate pride with Darcy and prejudice with Elizabeth. It's not true. Darcy is also prejudiced. He doesn't like the Bennets at all, especially Mrs. Bennet and the three younger daughters. He openly says, they don't know how to behave. I can't take them. Then Elizabeth also, starts with prejudice against Darcy because she was snubbed at the first dance. But then, when she realizes that she has misunderstood Darcy about Wickham, about other incidents, she says, I was priding myself on my discernments and abilities. I was proud of my abilities, my capacity for judging people and events. Now I realize that I was a fool. So she is also proud. Call it pride or self-esteem. Okay. Then, Jane Austen values objectivity. I'm skipping a part of it. A quality which she shared with Shakespeare. She has so much in common with Shakespeare. And Keats. These three writers, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, and Keats, in the chronological order, shared one great quality, that is objectivity, detachment, and that is what makes them unique. And that's what makes me respect them. They are my three favorite writers. Shakespeare, Keats writes, Shakespeare conceals, Victor Hugo said about Shakespeare, Shakespeare conceals nothing, condemns nothing. You keep yourself away. Let the villain do what he wants to do, let the villain speak as he pleases. Just because Shakespeare created Claudius and Iago, it doesn't mean he is a villain himself. Next time he will create a Desdemona or Othello. So, the phrase used by Keats is negative capability. Detachment, negative capability, objectivity, truthfulness, all means is about the same. Don't take sides, present the picture as you see. Now, the characters in Jane Austen's novels are lifelike. She wrote in the 18th century about 18th century British rural society. But I find in the 21st century, in my own, among my own relatives and friends, similar characters. There are people like Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet, people like Lydia, people like Lady Catherine, In fact, my sister-in-law was exactly like Emma. There is no limit to the number of marriages she arranged. She fixed marriages, just like that. Ironically, this lady died as a spinster at the age of 86, whereas the fictional Emma got married. So there are Emmas among us, there are Mrs. Bennets among us. That's why the characterization of Jane Austen is very close to, they have a universal quality. She is writing about British people, rural people in a round society, but they are very much like us. Now, just 1 minute more. I think Jane Austen gave a definite shape to the English novel. Before her, the novel was diffuse, and it was episodic, epical. Fielding calls his novel comic epic in prose. And then epistolary. Samuel Richardson, who wrote Pamela, uses letter form for writing the novel. Most of the letters are written by Pamela or from her journal. That kind of thing, he himself gave it up later on. To some extent, Elizabeth, Jane Austen also copied that writing letters. There are so many letters here. But she gave a definite shift to the English novel. As students of British literature, let us all salute this novelist par excellence on her 250th birth anniversary. Thank you. I think a lot of more time.
I thank Professor Rao for anchoring this session with your authoritative scholarship. We are truly privileged to benefit from your profound insights into Jane Austen's canon. Now we have Professor C.R. Viswaswara Rao concluded a distinguished 4-decade tenure in English studies, retired in 2006, served in pivotal administrative roles, including Pro-Vice Chancellor, Dean of Languages, Dean UGC Affairs, and Vice Chancellor of Vikramasimhapuri University. His academic contributions delineate the theoretical parameters of literary theory, post-colonial studies, translation studies, and comparative literature. He is credited with pioneering the introduction of Canadian literature at Sri Krishna Devaraya University. Professor Viswaswara Rao is a prolific scholar with a corpus of over 100 scholarly articles, 8 published edited books, including one important explorations in world literature. He has served on approximately 50 UGC AICTE committees, chaired several NAC peer teams, and delivered the chairman's address twice at All India English Teachers Conference. So it's our honor to hear from him. Yeah, over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ashraf, for coordinating this program. Professor Gulfishan Habib, Professor Shagun Shagufta, all the distinguished members of the round table, my young student friends, and Mrs. Sudha Ramanan. It gives me very great pleasure to participate in this, what Professor E. Nageshwar Rao calls the Jane Austen Festival. Professor Nageshwar Rao and I shared information about when our papers were getting ready. His paper got ready first. When I said my paper too was ready, he said, "What's the title?" I was puzzled because I didn't give it a title. I didn't know what title to give it. And therefore, probably in this paper, I will be journeying from a study of Jane Austen's Enlightenment approaches, Regency irony and her ethical realism, leading to the feminist undercurrent. she projects. Jane Austen is a central figure in the and early 19th century English literature, known for just 6 novels that provide a witty, ironic critic of the Georgian and Regency eras. The Georgian era, spanning much of the 18th century, shaped the moral and aesthetic foundations of our world. It was a time steeped in the Enlightenment values like reason, decorum, and a belief in social harmony. Literature from this period often idealized rural life, upheld traditional courtship rituals, and emphasized emotional restraint and moral clarity. Jane Austen's settings reflect this Georgian sensibility, that is, country estates, pastoral landscapes, and tightly knit communities where reputation, virtue, and propriety governed social interactions. Her use of conventional narrative forms and her subtle nostalgia for a more ordered society echo the Georgian literary tradition, even as she begins to question its limitations, particularly its rigid class hierarchy, patriarchal inheritance laws, and the narrow roles assigned to women. Jane Austen exposes how marriage was often treated as a financial necessity rather than a union in love, leaving women socially vulnerable. Through characters like Elizabeth Bennet, Pride and Prejudice, Anne Elliot, Persuasion, and the Dashwood sisters, Sense and Sensibility, Austen critiques the lack of female autonomy, the unfairness of property passing only through male heirs, and the moral hypocrisy of figures such as Mr. Collins or Lady Catherine, both from Pride and Prejudice. By blending irony and realism, she advocates, quietly but firmly, for marriages based on respect, love, and mutual understanding. Austen's novels are not revolutionary manifestos, but they subtly question the iniquities of Georgian society. With subtle irony and realism, she exposes the limitations imposed on women and critiques the rigid structures of class, marriage, and morality, making her work enduringly relevant. The Regency era, in contrast, introduced a sharper, more ironic lens through which Austen examined society. Modern feminist readings of Austen often highlight how her critiques of Georgian society anticipate later debates about women's rights and autonomy. By exposing the economic dependence of women, the unfairness of inheritance laws, and the expectation that marriage should be a woman's sole destiny, Austen's novels resonate with feminist concerns about systemic inequality. Feminist scholars see these portrayals as Austen's way of questioning the structures that limited women's agency, even if she did so within the constraints of her time. At the same time, keeping the focus strictly on Georgian context shows Austen as a sharp social commentator rather than a revolutionary. Her critiques focused on exposing the absurdities of class pretensions and gendered expectations rather than dismantling them outright. In this view, Austen's novels reflect the lived realities of women in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, offering a nuanced picture of how individuals navigated restrictive social systems. Elaine Showalter and Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober offer complementary feminist readings of Jane Austen's work, each highlighting her quiet but powerful challenge to Georgian society's constraints. Showalter situates Austen within the broader tradition of women's writing, arguing that her irony and focus on domestic life represent a subtle resistance to patriarchal norms and mark her place in the feminine phase of literary history. In contrast, Gilbert and Goober, in The Mad Woman in the Attic, with which you must be familiar, interpret Austen's novels as part of a larger struggle against the silencing of women's voices, suggesting that her restrained style and domestic settings serve as coded critiques of gender inequality. Together, these perspectives underscore Austen's dual role as both a product of a time and a writer whose work resonates with feminist concerns about autonomy, voice, and power. In this view, Austen's novels reflect the lived realities of the 18th and the 19th centuries. The Regency period exposed the tensions between elegance and excess, especially among the landed gentry and the aspiring bourgeois. Austen's novels dissect this world with precision, revealing the absurdities of class pretension, the constraints of gender roles, and the transactional nature of marriage. Her heroines navigate a society obsessed with appearance and inheritance, where romantic fulfillment is often entangled with economic survival. In this way, Austen's work bridges Georgian realism, Georgian idealism, and Regency realism, offering a critique that is both timeless and deeply rooted in her historical moment. As Jane Austen grew, her choice of reading materials may have included several prominent Enlightenment philosophers and writers, Wollstonecraft among them, Rousseau, and Hume. It is likely that Jane Austen read their works. Midway through Jane Austen's life, in 1792, when she was 17 years old, one of the first pieces of literature penned by a woman on the subjects of women's rights was published. And that was a vindication of the rights of women by Mary Wollstonecraft. It was lauded as the first piece of feminist literature by successive historians, and it shook the existing gender roles of Europe. In the very first page of this book, Wollstonecraft stated thus, I quote, "Contending for the rights of women, my main argument is built on this simple principle that if she is not prepared by education to become the companion of man, she will stop the progress of knowledge and virtue." I will skip some passages, but the education and situation of women at present shuts her out from such investigations. Such a perspective on women's education glaringly opposes the works of Rousseau, who in the most famous of his works, The Social Contract, writes on the inalienable sovereignty and the rights of men. He begins his treatise with the bold statement, "Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains." Jane Austen's novels go further than merely demonstrating the reality of life for women. In her book, Mirrors to One Another, Emotion and Value in Jane Austen and David Hume, Professor E.M. Dadless demonstrates the connections she discovered between Hume's philosophy and Jane Austen's books. She begins by summarizing her thesis thus, I quote, "My own contention about Hume and Austen isn't simply that Austen provides us with illustrations of Hume's ethical stance. I would like to establish further, beyond these initial parallels, that Austen's novels may be regarded as thought experiments that demonstrate something about the kind of moral reasoning that Hume advocates, that engages in that rational, emotional process as part and parcel of our imaginative participation in the work. Hume's ideas on morality and human nature, particularly on how character, sensibility, and social perception shape ethical judgment, have informed Jane Austen's perspective. It is argued that Austen's clear, ironic style vividly enacts Hume's concepts, making philosophy accessible while highlighting complexities like the sensible knave, a selfish but rational rogue, like, for example, Mr. Eliot in Persuasion, who embodies this concept. He is a selfish person who appears successful but lacks true moral fiber, showing that vice appears worldly and rational but misses deeper fulfillment. Also, Austen's narrative structure, forcing readers to judge characters from various viewpoints, about which Professor Nageshwar spoke, mirrors Hume's ideas of the impartial spectator essential for moral evaluation. The next point one may mention about Austen is that associated with the idea of a political Austen, we have, for example, an analysis by Rajeshwari Sundararajan, distinguished scholar in post-colonial studies, who highlights how modern scholarship has embraced Austen's engagement with ideas like class, gender, and empire, moving beyond the view of her as merely a domestic novelist concerned with a little bit of ivory 2 inches wide. This was a very familiar quote for us in our younger days at college. Austen herself used this metaphor in a letter to her nephew, James Edward Austen, in December 1816. In her essay, Austen and Empire, Jane Austen's post-colonial readers, Rajan explores how Austen's novel, often seen as quintessentially English and domestic, can be read in the light of Britain's imperial history. She argues Austen's novels are not untouched by the imperial context in which they were produced. Rather, they are implicated in it in ways that are subtle but significant, unquote. This quotation encapsulates her central thesis that Austen's seemingly insular narratives are in fact shaped by Britain's imperial reach, and that post-colonial readings can uncover the latent ideological and economic structures of empire embedded within her fiction. Rajan sees Austen's heroines as negotiating patriarchal structures with intelligence and agency, often within the constraints of marriage and domesticity. As we are aware, Rajan's work is part of a larger movement to decolonize literary studies. She argues that Austen's novels, though seemingly confined to the domestic and provincial concerns of Georgian England, subtly uncover latent ideological structures of empire by revealing how colonial wealth and imperial expansion underpin the genteel lifestyles of her characters. For instance, in Mansfield Park, Sir Thomas Bertram's estates and social standing are sustained by the Antigua plantations, a detail Austen leaves largely unexamined. But this can be construed as exposing the hidden reliance of the English gentry on colonial exploitation. Similarly, the naval careers celebrated in Persuasion are tied to Britain's imperial power once again, with Captain Wentworth's fortune and prestige derived from service in overseas conflicts. Now, just one mention about the dialogue aspect Professor Nageshwar Rao referred to, which is the acid test of a writer. And I won't be referring directly to dialogue, but to Austen's use of the indirect speech. One important aspect of Austen's writing is her use of free indirect speech, which allows her readers to access her characters' inner thoughts while maintaining a subtle narrative distance, enhancing psychological depth and realism of her storytelling. This free indirect discourse blurs the boundary between narrator and character, allowing readers to slip seamlessly into a character's consciousness while still maintaining their narrator's ironic distance. For example, in Pride and Prejudice, when Elizabeth reflects on Darcy's letter, the narration shifts into her thoughts. I quote, "She grew absolutely ashamed of herself. Of neither Darcy nor Wickham could she think without feeling she had been blind, partial, prejudiced, and absurd," unquote. Here, Austen lets us hear Elizabeth's inner voice directly, yet the phrasing retains the narrator's authority. This dual perspective achieves two effects. It conveys the immediacy of Elizabeth's emotions, while also inviting the audience or readers to recognize the irony of her self-reproach. Austen's mastery of indirect speech thus creates a subtle interplay between subjective experience and objective commentary, enriching her novels with psychological depth and social critique. While Jane Austen uses indirect speech chiefly to sharpen irony and expose social pretensions, George Eliot employs the same device to deepen psychological insight and moral reflection. In Austen, free indirect discourse often lets us hear a character's thoughts while simultaneously sensing their narrator's amused critique, as in Elizabeth Bennet's self-reproach, to which I pointed out in Pride and Prejudice. George Eliot, by contrast, fuses her character's inner voices with her own philosophical commentary, as in Mansfield Park, where Dorothea's hopes and doubts are narrated with a gravity that draws readers into her moral struggle. Thus, Austen's techniques highlight wit and social satire, whereas Eliot's expands empathy and ethical seriousness, showing how the same narrative device can serve very different artistic ends. And coming to the close of my article, I would like to mention Elaine Showalter is one of the most powerful, most influential of feminist literary critics of the late 20th century, known for developing the concept of gynocriticism. Showalter emphasizes that Austen's nuanced portrayal of women's agency with patriarchal constraints. She places Austen within a lineage of female authors from the Brontes to Virginia Woolf, who carved out space for women's voices in literature. In her essay, Feminist Criticism in the Wilderness and Other Writings, Showalter argues that Austen's irony and wit are a tool of resistance, and her novels are not merely genteel domestic tales, but subversive texts, and that subtly critique the limitations placed on women in patriarchal society. Thank you very much.
From a discussion on Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice to a broader discussion on Jane Austen's works, we have had two papers from the brain chat era and not the chat GPT era. To the young scholars present here, would you like to add to the discussion before we move to the next speaker? One or two very quick points, if you have. Okay, we move to the next speaker.
We thank Professor Viswaswara Rao for your rigorous engagement with the critical interrogation of Austen's canon. Now we have Professor Mohanji Ramanan, retired professor of English, whose 4-decade teaching career has been augmented by prestigious fellowships, including the British Council Scholarship, Merton College, Oxford, the Fulbright Fellowship, Amherst College, and the Montserrat Fellowship, Barcelona. His published studies on modern poetry, comparative literary traditions, such as his work on R.K. Narayan, position him uniquely to trace the intellectual genealogy of the novel, allowing us to situate Austen's formal innovations within the long durée of narrative structure. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. For initiating the process which led me to this conference. And I thank you, Kunshan, for agreeing to invite me. I am amazed at Professor Nageshwara's energy and enthusiasm for writers who, even though many people feel that they are, outmoded, he's able to give a local habitation and a name to such writers. This is because Jane Austen has not been very popular for a long time and amongst a large section of people. In her own time, I think she was largely ignored. And a person like Lord David Cecil, writing a book on the English novel, dismisses her as of very little consequence. I found an expression in Professor Vishweshwar Rao's paper brilliant, the lived experience which Jane Austen deals with, the lived experience, I think you said. And I want to make a few observations. First of all, these are days when the idea of the canon or the idea of tradition have received body blows. And yet we cannot deny that if you are a student of a subject, you should look at it like Northrop Frye did, as a whole, as a simultaneous whole if possible. And the past not only affects the present, but the present affects the past. And this is something which Jane Austen exemplifies. And I'll try to talk about that in a way, in a moment. The question has arisen, and people have talked about it at length, whether there is anything like the first English novelist. And the title goes to Defoe, it goes to Richardson, it goes to Fielding. These are all early 18th century writers. As far as Richardson is concerned, he wrote the epistolary novel, mainly. A novel like Clarissa Harlowe, but more than that, a manageable novel like Pamela, which is not so lengthy. Anticipates the idea of the point of view. Because when you write a letter, so many people are writing letters and exchanging letters. And each one is looking at the event or the episode from his or her point of view. Pamela, for example, is a great letter writer. And she is in the service of a nobleman who is not very noble ultimately. And in one episode, the epistolary novel loses its credibility, which is where the nobleman is about to seduce Pamela, and Pamela runs away from him and hides behind a closet and writes a letter to her father that this nobleman is doing this, as though it's possible to write a letter in such circumstances. So the epistolary novel has severe limits, and Jane Austen tried her hand at it. In 1790, in Love and Friendship, she was hardly maybe 15, 16 years old, she wrote a series of letters, epistolary fiction, in which she talks about love, friendship, the romantic life, and the capacity of woman to manage the conditions under which she is living in. Richardson also was strong, as F.R. Lewis has pointed out, in the inner life, in dealing with the inner life. And you find that he has psychological acuity, a capacity to get into the mind of his characters and explore the inner workings of their mind. But where he fails is in not finding an adequate form which will hold together this concern with the inner life. And this is where I think Jane Austen scores. I'll come back to this point in a minute. The other novelist is Fielding. Call him a novelist? Well, we can. But he's written a comic epic in prose. And he's depended quite a lot on the Tatler and the Spectator and the dramatic tradition of that period. And he writes Tom Jones in that context. And it's a comic epic in prose, as he calls it, which means that it is not a novel. A novel requires gravitas. It requires the lived experience of life. And it looks as if Tom Jones is not dealing with life as it is really lived. It's about an amoral, if not immoral, character called Tom Jones and his escapades. Dr. Johnson, whom Jane Austen admired greatly, placed Richardson on top of the chart, so to speak, and he called Fielding a barren rascal. So Jane Austen was a great admirer of Dr. Johnson, and I think some of that is also working in her mind when she writes her fiction. The third novelist whom we need to consider in this context is Walter Scott. Now he is a folklorist. He's a very engaging writer, and he writes good stories. And we have a series of stories dealing with the Scottish culture, Scottish history, Scottish folklore. But he wrote historical romances, and he could not escape from the romance tradition of that period. But he didn't write a historical novel, except, of course, Heart of Midlothian, where history becomes a character virtually. And this is where I invoke Lukács, who makes the point that history must become so deeply inward as to affect the lives of the characters who are depicted. And the characters, by their actions, must influence history. So when there is this symbiotic exchange between characters and history, you have a historical novel. Otherwise, you only write historical romances. Now, in Jane Austen's case, I would say that she uses history lightly, but visibly. And Professor Rao mentioned Mansfield Park. Fanny Price is a poor cousin of Edmund Bertram, and Sir Thomas Bertram, who has a very large property, has made his money out of the slave trade, the Antiguan slave trade. It's a very dark novel. Said writes admirably about Mansfield Park as a novel which is deeply historical in its its orientation. Jane Austen is not using history like Walter Scott does, but she's able to interweave the historical element in the novel to make it realistic, serious, and important. So, if we look at this configuration of three writers who are contemporaries and seniors, but each of them gives a certain it's too fast. Have I spoken for 15 minutes? Each of them provides a lesson to Jane Austen, and she internalizes it. And then she writes a fiction which has not only a lived sense of reality, but also excellent plot construction and form. So, in this ability to fuse form and content, history and structure, I think she scores over all these other writers. And therefore she can be considered as the first classical English novelist who, in a sense, made possible the future trajectory of the English novel with George Eliot and Conrad. Of course, you know the argument of F.R. Lewis on this point. I don't have time to go into issues of gender, class, and culture. So I'll conclude by saying that her main concern is to create conditions for her women characters to find suitable matches. A suitable match which is based on love, which is based on financial stability. These are concerns which in our own society, as Professor Nageshwar Rao was saying, we experience pretty intensely. So I would say that in effect, Jane Austen is the first major English novelist. She affects the future, and she affects the past. The whole history of English literature, in a sense, gets changed when you see Jane Austen's contribution. So in the occasion of her 250th birthday, I applaud her work and thank her for giving us such novels of repute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramanan, for your distinguished expertise on Austen's influence on the global literary tradition. Now we have Professor Parimala Kulkarni, professor in the Department of English at Osmania University, holding key administrative positions as Chair, Board of Studies in English, and the coordinator of both the Center for Australian Studies and the IQAC. With a distinguished 35-year pedagogical career, her specialization in women writing and her core research interests critically engage with English language pedagogy, Indian writing, and cultural studies. Notably, she was awarded a UGC Research Award a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship to execute a project titled Theorizing Singlehood, Images of Single Woman in Indian Fiction. Beyond academia, she serves as an esteemed resource person for research methodology workshops, and her expertise is leveraged to train diverse professionals. Her international engagement can be understood by a March 2025 visiting fellowship at the University of Western Australia and her role as convener of the international conference Plural Pass Share Futures Global Literary Interconnections in November 2025. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you for that very generous introduction. I would like to begin by thanking Professor Gulfisha and Dr. Karunisa, with whom I have been in contact for this. Thank you for having me here. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of senior scholars and also my teacher at the University of Hyderabad, Professor Ramnan. It is a great honor, sir, to be sharing the same platform as with you. So, and of course, all the others, it's a pleasure to meet. Now, keeping in mind the time limit constraints that we have, I will have a very broad kind of an overview. Though I have a full-fledged paper, I'll just read bits and pieces. Now, after that scholarly engagement with Jane Austen's novels, I am not looking at the novel as such, but the kind of impact it has left on popular fiction as well as the South Asian fiction. So I have two texts in mind. Jane Austen's text, Pride and Prejudice, the kind of impact it has had on in Europe itself as well as in the South Asian context. So I've called my paper 2.5 Centuries of Prejudice and the Global Transit of Matrimony, Pride and Prejudice and its Adaptive Avatars, Bridget Jones's Diary and Almost Single. Now, for those of us, we are familiar, Bridget Jones's Diary is a chicklet, a British chicklet. And this genre of chicklet has been called as for women, by women, of women. And it has gained a lot of disdain from literary scholars. At the same time, there have been people who have looked at this genre with great critique. And as Stuart Hall points out, popular culture cannot be dismissed as it contains perhaps a perpetuation of the hegemony of the dominant classes, but simultaneously the resistance also to that. In that context, I look at these two texts. So one is Bridget Jones's Diary, and the other one is Almost Single by Advaita Kala, which has been called Bridget Jones in a Sari. So I'll have a mix of read and then talk. So the enduring legacy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813, celebrating its 250th anniversary, rests not solely on its romantic appeal, but fundamentally on its functionality as a structural template for social satire and the development of the female psyche. Austen's novel is driven by a singular, unassailable economic premise. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So this initial statement dictates a narrative architecture that remains remarkably robust, allowing the core framework to transcend its Regency setting and adapt seamlessly across diverse centuries and geographies. The resilience of this framework is demonstrated through a critical intertextual chain comprising the canonical source and the two key modern avatars, Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones's Diary, published in 1996. It represents a crucial temporal migration to post-feminist urban London, and Advaita Kala's Almost Single, published in 2007, which executes a successful spatial migration, localizing the global urban female struggle within the complex cultural dualities of New Delhi. So the core narrative of both the novels is built upon universal tropes that kind of guarantee functional fidelity in adaptation. So there is the misunderstood reserved hero, the charming, manipulative deceiver, and the meddling parental figure. So the underlying dynamics of Pride and Prejudice, the initial misjudgment of character, and the subsequent necessary reversal of perception remain constant, even as the cultural specifics governing wealth, class, and the pressures of matrimony undergo radical transformation. So the celebration of Austen's structure 2.5 centuries later confirms its optimal utility as a diagnostic tool for measuring contemporary social friction. Now coming to the plot of Pride and Prejudice is necessitated by the legal and economic vulnerability of women in the early 19th century. The narrative imperative is driven by the threat of financial precarity, as we all know, specifically the entailment of the Bennet family estate, that is the Longbourn. So for Elizabeth Bennet and her sisters, marriage is thus not merely a social preference, but an existential requirement to secure status and physical sustenance. So this inherent financial dependence is the fundamental constraint on female agency in the Regency era. And against this constraint, Elizabeth Bennet is defined by her intellectual, witty, and defiant nature, using her composure and intelligence to resist the patriarchal expectations of her time. Her journey requires significant moral and intellectual labor. So the central dramatic conflict demands that Elizabeth must realize her own prejudice and Mr. Darcy must shed his inherited pride, a process achieved through lengthy reflection, painful confrontations, and textual devices like the epistolary form. Of course, the sophisticated use of dramatic irony and refined dialogue by Austen is crucial because language and narrative distance facilitate the slow, deliberate process of intellectual refinement required for both protagonists to reach a union that secures not only happiness but also financial security. So this is the archetype that we are talking about. Now, the evolution of the plot into the modern day Britain we are talking about. So the endurance of Pride and Prejudice template is an evidence of its capacity to transpose this central conflict into the evolving constraints faced by women across different societies and across the shift is both temporal as well as spatial. So now I look at the Bridget Jones' diary as a temporal migration. So here it is the new tyranny of post-feminism, where Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones' diary represents a transition from an economic satire to a critique of post-feminist anxiety in 1990s urban London. So the temporal shift required a corresponding change in the nature of societal pressure. So Elizabeth Bennet faced the material threat of poverty, whereas Bridget Jones faces the psychological trauma of ideological constraints. The pressures are not from just the external economic necessity to an internalized media-driven expectation, that is the new tyranny. So Bridget, we have very obsessively worries over her status as an unmarried freak in a society that harshly judges singleness. She identifies explicitly as a child of cosmopolitan culture, and in this novel, Fielding successfully maps the Pride and Prejudice conflict structure onto these post-feminist anxieties. And the next I would like to talk about is the spatial migration, that is the cultural obligation of matrimony. In Advaita Kala's Almost Single, the constraint shifts spatially to the urban professional milieu of New Delhi. The protagonist, Aisha Bhatia, is significantly different from Elizabeth Bennet in terms of economic standing. Aisha is economically secure, possessing independence through her high-status urban job at a 5-star hotel, allowing her access to a luxurious lifestyle. So however, the core constraint is transposed from economic necessity to socio-cultural stigma. Aisha operates within a collectivist Indian society where marriage is profoundly ingrained social institution and a sacred samskara. The pressure she faces is not ruin, but stigma, manifesting as the crushing weight of the ticking clock as she nears 30. Her financial independence, derived from her economic capital and professional success, is insufficient to overcome entrenched traditional values, revealing that in a collectivist, marriage-centric society, independence merely transforms the conflict into a struggle for identity legitimacy. So the novel, Almost Single, highlights this liminal status, reflecting society's reluctance to recognize singlehood as a valid core identity for women in this cultural context. So the matriarchal constant also remains, just like we have Mrs. Bennet, who relentlessly pursues wealthy suitors, is mirrored by Mama Bhatia's intensity of matrimonial negotiation. However, the focus here changes to an NRI, the non-resident Indian groom. So the matriarch's obsession is fueled by cultural expectation rather than pure economic fear, frames the pursuit of the NRI groom as an accept of globalized wealth. So the adaptation thus serves as a powerful contemporary document detailing the friction points in urban Indian society. Aisha's conflict is layered by gender, age, class, and cultural norms. The novel dramatizes the loving, exasperating tug-of-war between traditional customs and contemporary romance, illustrating how modernization and globalization coexist uneasily with traditional cultural imperatives, forcing urban professional women to negotiate the complex fine line between modernism and traditional values. So, what I would like to talk about is Bridget Jones's diary was seen as a direct inspiration from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In fact, one of them, P.D. James, I think, has called Jane Austen the mother of all chicklet, because in fact, she has been seen as the predecessor for all the popular romance novels like Mills and Boon. However, we all know there is a difference, but the basic template remains the same. So in that context, Bridget Jones, Helen Fielding directly acknowledges the influence of Jane Austen. Advaita Kala's Almost Single doesn't talk about it directly, but this has been called Bridget Jones in a Sari. And this falls into the genre of the commercial fiction. So accordingly, the witty critique, the irony, the satire that is present in Jane Austen's novels is not so much there in Advaita Kala's Almost Single, but these are the constraints of the genre in which she is writing. That is the commercial fiction that we are talking about. In fact, Bridget Jones' diary has the protagonist is also Mark Darcy. So from Fitzwilliam Darcy, there is Mark Darcy also. In Advaita Kala, it becomes Karan Verma. And so the archetypes continue there. And when compared to the characters, Darcy of Pride and Prejudice and later Mark Darcy and the third one, Karan Verma, there is hardly any comparison, obviously. He has been critically described. Karan Verma has been described as the bare bones of the Mr. Darcy figure and an outline of a person. So this psychological simplification of the male lead indicates a genre prioritization. And so there is a shift, the plot and then certain characters, the archetypal characters remain the same, but there is a shift in the communication and tone. So whereas Austen's plot in Pride and Prejudice is driven by misjudged judgments, sustained through formal irony and free indirect discourse, the gossip operating in a slow structured environment, transmitted through formal visits and the strategic use of letters, but the modern adaptations have a drastically different approach. So Bridget Jones's diary uses a first-person diary format and self-deprecating humor, utilizing parody and the comic deflation of the key scenes from Austen. Whereas Almost Single employs a very quote-unquote catty, chatty tone, which provides immediate and informal access to the protagonist's perspective. The urban setting of New Delhi accelerates the mechanism of misjudgment and gossip, which now circulates through social networking sites alongside conventional matchmaking, creating a rapid-fire environment for social judgment. Crucially, the humor in both Bridget Jones' Diary and Almost Single relies on the heroine's perceived flaws, clumsiness, weight obsession, and lack of self-control. This comedic framework, sometimes labeled bad femininity, is utilized to generate audience sympathy and simultaneously provide a critique of the impossible standards of modern womanhood. The core engine of literary engagement remains the comic heroine's necessary non-conformity. I would like to conclude by saying that the comparative analysis of Pride and Prejudice and its major modern avatars confirms the extraordinary functional adaptability of Austen's narrative structure. The Pride and Prejudice template is utilized across eras to address the unique and evolving constraints imposed upon articulate single women, confirming its sustained relevance 2.5 centuries after its publication. The enduring power of Austen's diagnosis lies in the paradox of universal structure enabling specific critique. The collective success of these adaptations validates the Pride and Prejudice matrimonial plot as a timeless tool for assessing contemporary social friction points related to class, gender, globalization, and cultural mandates. Crucially, all three novels utilize this template as a powerful vehicle for social commentary on enduring gender disparities. Elizabeth Bennet's defiance against patriarchal and economic constraints, Bridget Jones' comedy arising from her conscious resistance to impossible standards, and Aisha Bhatia's struggle for professional independence against cultural obligation all confirm the heroine's ability to assert autonomy across disparate social frameworks. This demonstrates that the legacy of the Pride and Prejudice remains and is enduring. And while I was browsing, I came across one work, Austen is Tan, published in 2017 by Lalin Sukhera. This has been called Austen with Garam Masala, and this is a book in Pakistan. And it was very, very interesting to look at this, though I don't have the time to go into all these things. I'll just conclude by saying Aisha Bhatia in Almost Single, she says that I don't need a man to pay my bills, but I need a man, however, to give me his name, indicates the economic necessity which was imperative in Jane Austen's time to the shift in the necessity for marriage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We are grateful for your distinguished perspectives and crucial components for our discussion. Now, introducing Dr. Shilpa Anand, an associate professor at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. Her scholarly foundation is cemented by a PhD in disability studies from University of Illinois in Chicago, informing a hermeneutic focus that scrutinizes the cultural historiography of disability. She has published in a number of journals that I have got, like Journal of Literary and Cultural Disability Studies, the Journal of Gender Studies, the Review of Disability Studies. Dr. Anand further amplifies her domain by sustaining an influential intellectual commons. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a bio note with some garam masala. But thank you. It was very generous of you. It's a bit of a homecoming here for me, and I'm very happy to be back in Manu at the Department of English and the School of Languages, Linguistics and Indology. And without much ado, I'd get started. I want to keep to my 9 minutes that I've given myself. I have a paper title, sir. It is Austen at 250 or Diagnosing the Problem of Canon Validation. When Dr. Karenisa invited me to speak at this roundtable, I didn't really know what I might speak about. For many women from urban centers of India like me, becoming readers in the 1980s and 90s, it was the most ordinary thing to have read a Jane Austen novel or a few and move on. There was nothing remarkable about having read an Austen novel. You did it because it had to be done. Whether you went on to college programs in the sciences, the social sciences, or the humanities, it didn't matter. It was a thing you did. So returning to think about Jane Austen after all these years, of course, apart from pondering on why we must do this at all, have a roundtable to celebrate a white woman writer because she has survived in our syllabi for decades and decades, meant having to also recall if I had ever taught her. Then I remembered in a very convoluted manner I had taught her, and this was through a critique of F.R. Lewis's great tradition. So it's very complicated the way one was getting to Austen through Lewis. This was in fact something I had taught here in the Department of English as part of the literary criticism course. And so Austen figures in Lewis's canonization of her as the first modern novelist who is unambiguously moral. But of course we must ask many questions today, and I think that's why this roundtable is kind of interesting. Is Austen relevant at all? How does somebody who's dabbling in a field called disability studies or literary and cultural disability studies engage with Jane Austen? I think it primarily happens because of how Jane Austen's novels are full of the ways in which normalcy, able-bodiedness, and saneism are produced and reproduced. And I think in the papers that have been presented thus far, we have some semblance of that, where you have this kind of obsession with covering up things, this kind of obsession with having to appear a certain way, this kind of obsession with maintaining certain kinds of normalcy. Normalcy is a very much derogatory term within disability studies, so I want to place that there before going forward. Forced to think of Austen from within this perspective, I could only consider that a lot of her characters indulge in a certain kind of ableist masking. Masking is something that emerges from within the autism discourse, where you have to constantly act as if you're not autistic in order to be accepted in a world that's not accepting of neurodivergent people. Setting aside the usual and misplaced charges of anachronism in evaluating a 19th century novelist in terms of a contemporary category of social difference, I think it's relevant to propose an unpacking of Jane Austen in relation to the kinds of people she offers us. In doing so, Austen becomes as much a sociological text as a literary one. Let us consider that the period that Austen wrote in, referred to as the Regency period, is one replete with disability references, since even a quick wiki search will tell you that it was the period marked by King George III's absence from the throne due to what is popularly referred to on the internet as mental illness, but however we would discuss that now as a psychosocial disability, him having acquired certain kinds of conditions that were both related to the body and the mind in response to this very early responsibility he had to take on to take over the throne. As I was looking through work within disability studies, I did find that there were several literary scholars who had worked on Austen, and one of them is Diane Dreiger. who uses a certain form of personal reflection and literary analysis to explore disability representations in Jane Austen's novels. In a chapter titled Jane Austen and Me, Tales from the Couch. The author of the paper is also someone who lives with chronic illness and is thinking about what it means to read Austen, who has a wide range of characters, with different kinds of illness and disability experiences. Now, this author of the paper, who's also a disability rights advocate, re-examines Austen's works like Mansfield Park, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and Persuasion from her perspective. As a teenager, she says, she identified with characters facing social exclusion, but as an adult, she recognizes many as potentially disabling by conditions like chronic pain, lupus, or depression, often invisible impairments dismissed as malingering. Fanny Price, who has come up already in conversation, in Mansfield Park, embodies physical frailty and emotional isolation, mirroring real disabilities overlooked in Regency society. Anne Elliot, in Persuasion, suffers persistent invalidism, post-breakup, likely depression, or chronic fatigue. Characters like Mrs. Bennet and Mary Musgrove highlight hypochondria versus genuine stigmatized illnesses. So it also offers us an opportunity to think of how hypochondria is made fun of, is ridiculed, and so on. And so that also becomes the only access through which illness or disability are discussed at all, rather than thinking about the materiality of these conditions. Dreijer connects Austen's portrayals to ongoing stigma against invisible disabilities, challenging heroic or pitiful tropes. The chapter advocates viewing these figures through a disability studies lens, affirming their validity amid patriarchal medical dismissal. There's another paper by somebody called Janet Todd called The Unruly Body, and that's a chapter that has been published this year in a book called Living with Jane Austen. And it expands on Regency England's health crises, portraying disability as a pervasive force shaped by class, mobility, and infection. Todd details how diseases like typhus, typhoid, influenza, smallpox, cholera, measles, mumps, scarlet fever, and puerperal fever thrived amid unsanitary towns, rural malnutrition, poor harvests, depressed wages, and war-driven troop movements, importing strains from India, the Caribbean, France, and Spain, to also hark back to the conversations around a post-colonial reading of Austen that may be possible. Localized outbreaks persisted due to limited travel until the 1815 post-Napoleonic surge, with houses of recovery established in the 1790s to quarantine patients and disinfect beds post-mortem, primarily to halt spread from lower to upper classes. Child and maternal mortality was rampant, exacerbated by inadequate obstetrics and urban expansion in northern manufacturing hubs. The chapter connects these realities to the Austen family, noting mentally disabled brother George was exiled to another household for life rather than institutionalized, reflecting shame and secrecy around cognitive disability. In novels like Sanditon, invalids and unruly bodies symbolize social disruption, with characters' debilities critiquing mobility, inheritance, and hypochondria amid genuine epidemics. Just to round this discussion off, I thought that perhaps there is a certain kind of relevance to rereading parts of the canon, and that's what we are doing there. In relation to emergent fields like disability studies and medical humanities, And for me, at least two reasons stand out. One is to refocus on Austen from the perspective of how we might ask and think about what the canonization of such authors and texts has achieved at all, if it's obscuring certain kinds of things, if it's deliberately not visibilizing lived experiences of chronic illnesses, disabilities, and so on. And the second reason, which I think is very interesting to read from within the present context. In fact, there's a Telugu writer very recently whose work has been translated into English by Sunita Rani, who's at the University of Hyderabad, who has these short stories on women experiencing various illnesses, right? And the author of this collection is also a doctor, and she has written these short fiction from knowing these women and so on. So I thought that revisiting Austen and kind of dissecting her, since I began with a medical metaphor, is also making it possible for us to look at the long history of women's relationship, rather non-relationship, to medical diagnosis and treatment. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yes. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now we have Dr. Siddharth Satpathy, faculty at the University of Hyderabad, a leading voice in Victorian and post-colonial studies. Dr. Satpathy was most recently a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. His forthcoming monograph, Provincial Victorian, is a vital thing for contextualizing the coloniality of manners and the implicit political economy of Austen's settings. Due to time constraints, sir, over to you, sir.
Yeah, this is fine. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this roundtable, and I deeply appreciate the comments and observations which have been made already. So, without much further ado, what I would like to present over the next 10 minutes would be about a question. And that question is something that I hope is reflected in the title of my talk, and the title is Jane Austen at Cuttack, a short history of translations. So the question that I have is this: what histories can we tell when we combine an author or a literary genre with a geographical locale, with a place, particularly when we do not usually bring them together? So when we talk about Jane Austen and her novels and a place like Cuttack, place name, then what kind of histories can we talk about? What kind of histories, cultural, literary, that we can talk about, social, that we can talk about? What I would like to do is to present two translations of Jane Austen that happened in Cuttack. The first one is a translation of Pride and Prejudice. The translator was Sridhar Das. The title in translation is Ahamika and Vranti. It was part of a series called Vishwa Sahitya Granthamala, which was, in English, it would be the World Literature series of books. It was brought out by a publisher called Grantha Mandir. And the place where this publisher was located was Cuttack. So that's where this translation and the publication had happened. So the first year that it came out was 1973. Then the next edition comes out 2004. Then another edition comes out 2012. So this is the first translation of Pride and Prejudice into Odia that I would like to talk about. The next translation that I would like to talk about is of Emma.
The translator is Dasrathi Patnaik. The publisher remains the same, Granthamandir. The series also remains the same, world literature books. The place remains the same, and the years are 1983, 2004, and 2013. These two texts, I would like to talk about this project of translation that this publisher mounted. So the first point that I would like to make is about the publisher. Granthamandir was established in 1954. 1950s is the time when the first commercially viable publishers came onto the Odia publishing scene, and all of them were located in the town called Cuttack. So several of these other publishers which began to make translation available as a commercially viable project, or to make world literature or classics of world literature as a commercially viable commodity onto the market, this begins in the 1950s. Now, this publisher, Granthamandir, remains the most prestigious and commercially successful publisher if we talk about apart from these translations of the world classics in which Jane Austen happened. So it remains the most authoritative, commercially successful publisher, and it becomes authoritative and commercially successful because of its publication strategies. What it does basically is to publish the collected editions or the collected volumes of the literary works of prestigious Odia authors from the modern times, early modern times till now. So that's the first point I would like to make before we go into the translation itself. First, the post-independence history of commercial publication in a regional language tradition at a particular place. So when we talk about a particular place and talk about combining Jane Austen with a particular place, be it Hyderabad, be it Cuttack in this matter, it could be any other place that we can think about. So the first point that comes to me to tell is about the commercial publication industry. So the commercial publication market that flourished or began to acquire a shape from the 1950s onwards in this particular place at Cuttack. Next, the series. The series, this World Vishwa Sahitya Granthamala, or World Literature books or titles in Odia, that begins as back as 1957. So 1957, the same translator who translated Jane Austen, that's the guy who began this series in 1957. The first translations that he did was of Oliver Twist and David Copperfield. And along with that, Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. So these works first came out, a debut in 1957 with rudimentary illustrations associated with them and all that, priced at 75 paise in 1957. And slowly this series took shape, acquired more and more titles to the extent of almost more than 100 titles, translating Shakespeare, translating Jane Austen, translating Dostoevsky, translating Gorky from Cervantes, and so on and so forth, Maupassant, Three Musketeers of Alexander Dumas, so on and so forth, but via English, of course. These translators didn't have access, to the best of my knowledge, didn't have access to original French or German, French or Russian and other languages. So the series. So that was the second point that I would like to make. Here are certain illustrations, if I can show. So these would be the first volumes, how they look like, the initial 1957 editions. So the next point that I would like to make is about the translator. So what would be the intellectual biography of this translator look like when we talk about this translation of Jane Austen? So Sridhar Das, the translator, 1901 to 1988, he taught Odia literature in a local college in Cuttack, so basically a part of the academia, just like all of us. So he inherited two colonial models of literary scholarship. One, a language-centered one, so he produced dictionaries, so he produced grammars, so on and so forth. The second model was text historical criticism, which is he brought out critical editions of medieval Odia literature. Now, translation became available to him, or translation he took up as a kind of a post-colonial form of literary scholarship, or post-colonial model of literary scholarship, which was about bringing the world to Cuttack, or bringing the world to a local place. Now, second point that I would like to make there, as far as this translator goes, the translation projects had institutional histories associated with them, or behind them, informing them. What kind of institutional histories? So this translator of Jane Austen had also done translations, other kinds of translations for other kinds of institutions. So the US information services, which was the US propaganda service basically, as far as the Vietnam War was concerned. So Sridhar Das had also translated stuff from them, or for them, into Odia, from English into Odia, so talking about the Vietnam War and all, 1960s. And he also went on to win the Soviet Land Nehru Award in 1974. So that means the other side of the propaganda machine was also at work, and he had also translated stuff from the Soviets into Odia. Now, that's the kind of a short intellectual biography or institutional location of this person who was translating Jane Austen into Odia. The first translation in an abridged form that I'm going to talk about, 1973. The next point that I would like to make, what kind of readers was this Vishwa Sahitya Granthamala, or this series of world literature that came out in Odia, in which Austen featured? What kind of readers did they want to make? And this making of the reader, making of a reader of Jane Austen in India, that is the direction in which that I'm trying to think about or reconstruct that process. And that is the direction in which the post-colonial, the particular strand of post-colonial thought that I am working with is taking me towards. So, on the back cover, you would have informations about the readers. These are the volumes which have no prefaces, which are bare minimum illustrations, so to keep it a commercially viable product. So, pared down, minimal, and abridged. So what the certain kinds of comments about the readers that I'm trying to gather together, I'm just going to read them out. So here is on the back cover of a particular title, Alexander Dumas in Service of the Queen, that translation, it says, collect the abridged translations in Odia of world famous writers at an affordable price and give them to children to read and enhance their inclination to read. Enhance their inclination to read. Another comment comes, storybooks, and this is associated with Jane Austen at the back of it. Storybooks that can provide thrill, can enchant the adolescent readers. The more than 100 titles of Vishwa Sahitya Granthamala have provided such books to the Odia children. They have derived joy out of reading these books, have grown acquainted with world literature, and have cultivated the habit of reading books. And a last one that I would like to read out. These books have become immensely attractive to teenaged students, both male and female. It has stimulated their imagination and fostered love for literature. This point that I'm trying to make is about the production of a reader of Jane Austen. What kind of a reader in India, in Cuttack, or for that matter, any other locale that we come from, be it Hyderabad, be it Pune, elsewhere. So how is the reader of Jane Austen is produced? That's the question that I'm trying to deal with, and that's the question I'm exploring in this paper. It's a part of a paper in progress. So emphasis is on the inclination to read, cultivation of a certain kind of a taste, and fostering a love for literature amongst both men and women students. Basically, it's positioned as young adult fiction, which would be beneficial to both the education establishment as well as the family establishment. The next point that I would like to make, to talk about very briefly, where else was Jane Austen present at Cuttack? So So this series of world literature translations, this is one kind of a project, basically beginning from 1957 and concluding thereabouts 1970s. So where else was Jane Austen present? Another history of Jane Austen at Cuttack again can begin with a text called A Companion to World Literature or Biswa Sahitya Parichaya that came out in 1982. This volume was prepared by the leading English departments of the region. So the English departments of Utkal University, of Barampur University and other universities. Basically those English departments spearheaded this project and brought out A Companion to World Literature in 1982, and it was primarily backed by, if you read the preface to this volume, and I'll talk about that volume in a moment and how it connects to Jane Austen. This project traces its origins back to the Kothari Commission's recommendation in 1968 to promote higher education in Indian languages, and the subsequent formation of the Orissa State Bureau of Textbook Preparation and Production that was happening in 1970. So these English literature departments, the doyens of English literary studies in the region, they brought together this companion primarily directly in response to the Odisha state government's emphasis on promoting education in the regional language. So how would you promote English education in the regional language? So if that's the contradictory question that we are facing up, the solution that they came up with, and it's a very uniquely produced volume, is to produce a companion to world literature in Odia. It's a kind of an encyclopedia of world literature, which would have entries, short entries about genres, about particular novels, about particular authors, but be in Odia. So this massive volume has a 2-page entry on Jane Austen and also an entry on Pride and Prejudice, the only of her works which finds mention in that encyclopedia. So how do they present Jane Austen there? So Masters of English Literature, English Literary Studies, in the early 80s and 70s, they're presenting Jane Austen as an immaculate representation of middle-class life in world literature. Or middle-class life world in Britain. So what I'm presenting is two kinds of responses to Jane Austen. First, we have this Biswa Sahitya Granthamala, which is young adult fiction, abridged translation, which is aiming at thrill. The next is we have this Companion to World Literature, which comes out 1982, primarily aimed for MA and BA students, who's presenting Jane Austen as a middle class representation of the middle class world in Britain. So I will conclude with 3 more observations, and those would be the work ahead. This paper, as I take it further, what's the work, what's the direction in which I'm trying to move it forward, which would be first to form a questionnaire to gather readers' experiences of reading Jane Austen as teenagers. I was a part of that. I did not encounter Jane Austen in English first. I encountered Jane Austen in Odia first. So that experience of encountering Jane Austen, or for that matter, David Copperfield, or Gorky, for that matter. So what difference does it make when you come across Jane Austen in vernacular, in Vasa traditions first, and then you go on to read the novel in English? So questionnaire and data collection first. So from the 1970s onwards, almost the last quarter of the 20th century, the experience of reading Jane Austen in Cuttack. So questionnaire, data collection. Publisher interviews, these publishers who brought out this series, so I'm planning to do the interviews and see how their responses are. We do not know, or I do not know yet, what edition of Jane Austen did these translators follow while they did their translations. So once we find out what edition they followed, then I can compare the actual translation that they did and the English original and the differences and so on and so forth. So, and full list of translators and their intellectual biographies. So who were the people who were doing, or who were making Jane Austen available to the local readers? So these are some of the areas that I would like to put forward, or to take it forward. And I would like to conclude my observations with a particular reference to a text, not necessarily of Jane Austen, but which is part of this larger project of translating English classics into the vernacular languages of India, a project that begins not now, but at least 200 years back. Very recently, a friend of mine who works on Urdu and is based in Calcutta, he gave me a text that came out from Agra in 1838 in Urdu, which is a translation of Rassalas, of Johnson's Rassalas. So that was one of the first or one of the earliest translations into Urdu of an English classic. Comes out in Agra because Agra was one of the centers of textbook productions as far as the Urdu language is concerned. So what I'm saying is that when I'll return to the question with which I began, the question is that when, or this is a particular strand of the post-colonial thought, that post-colonial work or scholarship that I'm located in. And the question is this, that when we associate a particular genre or a particular author from England or Britain, who we read, appreciate, value for a variety of purposes, and who's part of our disciplinary location, and who we value for the universal appeal, and what kind of cultural histories can we reconstruct, can we talk about when we associate that author or genre from England to a particular geographical place in India, be that Agra, be that Hyderabad, or be that Cuttack. So these two which are not usually associated, when we bring them together, what kinds of possibilities for cultural history does it open up? So here, that's the question that I would like to raise, and that I would like to put on the table for the conversation forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Satpathy. Your insights and necessary critical consciousness and transnational consciousness regarding Austen's canon has been really remarkable. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Asma Rashid, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of ELT, FLU, Hyderabad. Her research focuses on the broad field of education, specializing in multilingualism and language planning. Dr. Rashid's work on curriculum and translating, particularly her recent co-editing and translation of Urdu series of different tales, is essentially critical critically important for the talk we are having today. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. Feel free to stop me at 10 minutes. One of the things that I'll begin by first thanking the organizers and for having me here today. One of the things that happens when you come this late in the panel is that a lot of people have already, I'm very conscious of the fact that some of the senior teachers here have already spoken at some length about Jane Austen's work and the context of her work as well. I'm also conscious that I am standing between the audience and two things. One is a beloved teacher, Shugufta Shaheen, and the next is lunch after. So, which is why I would say stop me at 10 minutes. Right. Like some of the speakers have said, I also probably met Jane Austen in some abridged version, you know, long back. I don't even remember when. And the usual sort of association of Jane's work with marriage and romance, which is where we seem to be, largely the critical work around her seems to be. But as I think one or two people have hinted, and also Siddharth's thing about the post-colonial location, that when we began to read of larger sort of, or wider, if you like, the socioeconomic worlds and the contemporary context in which Austen is populating her figures, the landscape in which they are sort of in the pursuit of matrimony, that is when, for me, the interest in, well, not Austen specifically, but texts of that time sort of grows. After all, as I think was also stated during the inaugural session today, I'm not sure, but Austen is second only, widely held to be second only to Shakespeare in her significance of English literature, right? The Jane Austen, and I'm going to speak a little bit about canon and the location of Austen over time. That's where my interest would be in terms of English studies. So the Jane Austen of the literary canon, enshrined in disciplinary English studies, has therefore, like with Shakespeare, been studied for its interrogations of what is called English in terms of language, in terms of literature, in terms of nation, ideology, and so on. That were articulated for me most conspicuously from post-colonial spaces. Professor Vishveshwara Rao has spoken about Rajeshwari Sindarajan's work there. I think she has edited a book called The Post-Colonial Jane Austen with co-editor Park. So yeah, that literary criticism in general has become more reflexive about the discipline as well as the institution of literary studies. Now, if you think about the time when Jane is writing, a sort of a national canon, and this is where I'm going to stay with, is unfolding along sort of two, different yet unrelated paths. So the one is through the question of a national canon, which shifts for some time between Samuel Johnson's lives of the most eminent English poets sometime in 1770s. And there is also Thomas Warton's more systemized kind of account in the history of English poetry a little bit later. Before, of course, and this has come up also, which culminates in this romantic kind of move to assemble a vernacular canon, which would suit school curricula. So students in English literature departments are, of course, very familiar with this. I'm thinking about Wordsworth and his preface to Lyrical Ballads, where he talks about, or he claims to represent in his language, the language of ordinary people in his poetry, and sort of identifies and, how do I put it, anthropologically inflected national popular as the locus of a new literature. Of course, Samuel Johnson has already, in his Dictionary of the English Language, he's already defined the idea of the literary as learning, skill in letters, right? It's already been said. But if this is what is happening in, as our chief guest in the morning said, in the UK, then there is something else happening in the colony, and that's, Siddharth was speaking of Cuttack. I'm going to speak more widely, and you spoke about the South Asian, and I'm going to speak largely in terms of the colony then. And to trace this parallel for a bit, Jane Austen, who is in fact 8 or 10 years old when a person called William Jones reaches Calcutta, right, in 1783. And Jones is part of this circle which includes Samuel Johnson, it includes Boswell, Joshua Reynolds, it includes Edmund Burke. There was some reference to contract, and there is Edward Gibbon, whose history is being assembled, if you like, and of course many other disciplines. So when Jones arrives in Calcutta, he's about 36 years old, and he's already a celebrated author. This is, the Oriental scholarship has already sort of 17th, 18th century has already been there. He's a celebrated author of a French and later English translation of a Persian biography of this Afsharid monarch Nader Shah. He's written a popular Persian grammar in English. He's done translations of poems from various Asian and European languages, treatises on ways to suppress political riots. There's a shifting class as something that several speakers have referred to, my co-panelists. So he's written treatises on the suppression of on ways to suppress political riots and the principles of, he's written about principles of governance, he's written tracts on the laws of bailments, etc., etc. So all of these writings in English, in French, in Latin, and translations from different languages are a mark, if we like, of his, dare I say, Menlit? Displayed his, what would more traditionally be called classical education at Oxford, as well as his what's called his remarkable talent for language learning. So in his inaugural address at Calcutta, when he's speaking as the first president of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, and in fact the society is sort of being set into place, he talks about the sea voyage from Europe when he arrives, and he talks about, quote unquote, the amphitheater of Asia, where he says that India lay before us, and there's Persia on our left, and there is a breeze from Arabia on our stern, and so on. So this kind of epiphanic experience of being, quote unquote, encircled by the vast regions of Asia triggers for Jones an inexpressible kind of pleasure, and he laments, he actually speaks in his speech that there is a current paucity of reliable knowledge about all of these regions, and he says that how important and extensive a field was yet unexplored, and how many solid advantages unimproved. So Jones's discourse has been taken to sort of highlight, according to several scholars, two aspects of 18th century empires and their material discursive networks. And one, as he speculates on the possible name for the society, he's talking about it, and he observes that, quote, if it be necessary or convenient that a short name or epithet be given to our society in order to distinguish it in the world, that of Asiatic appears both classical and proper, whether we consider the place or the object of the institution, and preferable to Oriental, which is in truth a word merely relative, and though commonly used in Europe, conveys no very distinct idea. This is a kind of a ground clearing that William Jones is doing, if not a rejection of the word Oriental. And this is quite curious, coming from a person who is, taken as a leading Orientalist of the Enlightenment era. So we can see, or it has been said, that his work can be seen as inaugurating, if we like, a new regime of knowledge, which is characterized by a shift from conventional Orientalism to clearly bounded territorial inquiry. If we recall, Jones does go on through his work on comparative philology and law as more than occasional, if not conjoined, links between Asia and Europe. And I think Professor Panchanan Mohanty is not here, but he would talk about linguistics and Jones's contribution to the morphological, typological, and all of that stuff, where Sanskrit and languages get cast into families. But by the time of his third anniversary discourse in around 1786, Jones is outlining a rudimentary structure of what later becomes an Indo-European hypothesis. He's charting, if we like, a supranational, transcontinental, and cross-cultural institutions, but basically the idea that it is around this time that a new sort of idea, modern idea of the literary as a sovereign order of textuality is being put in place. But before we think about English literature as a taught subject in Indian higher education from the early decades of the 19th century, and again, I'm sure we all know that education was in the classics of Latin and Greek and so on, where England was concerned or United Kingdom was concerned, and Shakespeare gets taught in Calcutta for the first time. So, but it might be worthwhile to recall that all of this is being shaped in part by what is known as the Orientalist Anglicist debate of the time. I'm thinking here in terms of texts such as James Fraser's The History of Nadir Shah, which is published in 1742, Holwell's interesting historical events relative to the provinces of Bengal and Empire of Hindustan, which is in 3 volumes again. And Alexander Dow's The History of Hindustan, which is going to talk about the Oriental despot and is going to resonate over the decades, if not the century. There is also, of course, Nathaniel Halhead's translation of a digest of Hindu personal law as a code of Gentoo laws or ordinations of the Pandits, and there is his Halstead's Grammar of the Bengal language. So underpinned by these kinds of administrative decisions about a literary canon, which is happening around this time, the corpus of what is called English literature gets fashioned to signal racial superiority. Several of my co-panelists have talked of other things. I was wondering whether race is something that we're also going to think about. The imperial order is being shaped through these literary canons and cultural artifacts. William Jones's, what he calls a singular species of poetry. Warren Hastings, the first Governor General of British India, who writes this preface to the first English translation of the Bhagavad Gita by Charles Wilkins in 1785, and he talks about latitude of criticism, and that's the term he uses. Then, of course, there is Goethe's world literature, there is Schlegel's literary history, and all of these which will shift from philosophy into culture via Matthew Arnold, as I think was mentioned earlier. So English literature, in terms of its colonial shaping, was thus to become a very productive, if we like, coming together of imperialism, race, class, gender, sexuality, another word which we haven't thought about so far in this panel. So if these are some of the wider contexts in which Jane's work is being published, it's being received, it might also be useful to think about the different kinds of shifts which have happened when we read her work, across time, if you like. Early studies, scholarship, quite famously, and we have heard about it today as well, examined her work in terms of what was called the limits of her form, the themes and style, her satire, variously comedy, gentility, British provinciality, tradition, upper class leisure, courtship, and of course marriage. These have been perceived, as matters either of the author's decorum or ignorance, or of a deliberate knowing and irony, the first two attributable to her class location and her gender, and irony variously to her temperament or the genre of her writing. I think Professor Vishweshwar Rao indicated how there is a different paradigm shift by the 1970s when Suez or Hungary or Korea or Vietnam or Algeria, McCarthy, Cold War, all of these indicate currents when culture becomes a crucial term and terrain for engagement. The way that I have read scholarship about or been introduced to scholarship about Austen is that there is this shift which comes with work like Raymond Williams in the 70s, which later, of course, leads to Edward Said's, not leads, but perhaps also opens. So Raymond Williams, for example, very famously, again, also Mansfield Park, and he talks about it, shifts the emphasis from Jane as a novelist of personal relationships to one analyzing personal conduct, and from a novelist recording a traditional world to one following the changes of a social class. This leads perhaps to Edward Said's argument about the 19th century novelist shaping an idea of England in ways that depended upon the relationship between home and abroad, which is, my co-panelists have spoken about it. Right, given the little note that I've already got, I'm going to sort of skip parts of whatever I had, and I should also remind ourselves, this might be an opportune moment before I conclude, to remember that Jane's birthday coincides with the Boston Tea Party. 16 December is also the day when American colonialists dumped all those 350 whatever chests of tea in that harbor, and this famously led to retaliatory actions, which led to different things, and also leads to the war of independence from the American colonies, and which the reason I was going to touch about it was to sort of indicate how this shift east towards colonial expansion. But right, to conclude now in my last paragraph, if we are to consider Jane in terms of university departments, in terms of literature and language studies, then we can think about her work perhaps in at least two ways. One, the new kinds of questions her novels pose and shape, and the kinds of interrogation of English studies from other spaces. Criticism of Jane's work has in recent decades begun to shift from an evaluation or valorization of her fiction to sort of, in the 70s, the inaugural decades, if you like, of literary criticism, which came from a feminist perspective, which is looking at it in terms of a subversive writing in patriarchal society. that a school of feminist criticism sort of stated. In recent decades, her novels have come to be viewed in the context of larger national, European, and imperial structures of events, ideas, and ideologies. There has been a reevaluation of the question of gender itself, not her as a woman, but the question of gender itself, and centrally also of domesticity. What constitutes domesticity? We seem to take it for granted, but there has been a body of work which is rethinking all of these questions about, in conjunction with other questions about the nation, commerce, slave trade, war, military conquest, travel. To mention only one person that I can think of is Nancy Armstrong's Desire in Domestic Fiction, which is also a 1980s work, quite dated. But she addresses questions such as the significance of bourgeois femininity and domesticity in the context of colonial exchange, the construction of leisure and its effect on the ways women's space, work, subjectivities were imagined in 19th century England. We may now attend to a new domestic, threatened, breached, reconsolidated in the face of an insurrectionary outside. And very quickly then, I know I keep saying very quickly, but I cannot help but mention that there has been, perhaps about 10 or 12 years ago, it was in the news that the tech companies were offering as one of the perks, they were offering their women employees to freeze their eggs, all right? This is, what is this? It is desire, it is domesticity, it is a different form of, it is a different question of, recasting of, if you like, domesticity. So when we talk about feminism and domesticity, that there are new kinds of insurrectionary outsides that are coming up, and a whole range of issues and considerations that have been brought into play that have extended, if not transformed, the affective and intellectual meaning of selfhood and the domestic sphere. And I'll stop now for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am, for bringing indispensable argument to the enduring legacy of Austen. Now, finally, we have Professor Shugufta Shaheen, former head of the Department of English, Professor, Department of English, OSD 1 at the Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Hyderabad. Her scholarly focus on comparative literature, post-colonial studies, and gender studies, combined with a deep knowledge of Urdu and Deccan literature, provides an essential comparative vector for this discussion.
Thank you, Ashraf. I would like to begin by thanking the coordinators of this session for the choice of the panelists, because that is what my paper addresses. In terms of a very balanced panelist, in terms of gender, in terms of age, because that is what my paper proposes to address here. It's titled The Gendered Reception of Austen, Masculinity, Desire, and the Politics of Reading. Here I would like to explore a question that continues to shape the cultural reception of Austen. Is Austen symbolically reserved for women? And more importantly, the reaction to a man declaring himself as an avid reader of Jane Austen's novels. When a man says, "I loved Austen," it is often interpreted not as a literary statement, but as a disruption of gender performance. The response is often joking, suspicious, or vaguely patronizing, as if to love Austen is to soften or destabilize one's masculinity. The paper subverts this perception and aims to contend that the reluctance of male readers to read Austen stems from subtle displacement of patriarchal authority and not so much from domestic triviality. Reading consumption has long been gendered, and this gendered response reveals how reading itself is seen as a site for performing masculinity and femininity. This cultural divide becomes even clearer when we examine reading practices historically. Women read male authors in order to access intellectual life, literature, culture, and education. From Samuel Richardson's Pamela to Mallory's Arthurian adventures to Dickens' serialized moral worlds and Hardy's tragic fatalism, these texts were culturally sanctioned and considered serious, and were enjoyed and read by women. Reading works written by men has never been culturally coded as a threat to femininity. Unfortunately, it's not the same the other way around. Very few men read Austen, the Brontes, or George Eliot, not because their work lacked artistic merit, but because reading them is treated as crossing into feminized emotional territory. To read Dickens is to be socially involved, to read Hardy is respectable, but to read Austen's or the Brontes is for some men a risk, a potential breach, a departure from the expected bearing of masculine literary taste. This imbalance reveals that literature is not merely a cultural product, it's a tool of gender construct. Women read books written by men because they're thirsty for knowledge and information. Men avoid reading women because they're not comfortable with the social perceptions connected without much realizing the fact that they are very much a part of the society and domestic space depicted by the women writers. Austen's characters, both men and women, are neither so totally white nor totally black, but shades of gray. The people we meet at bus stops, at railway stations, as we wait for the train, and at social gatherings. I think Professor Nageshwara has mentioned how, and he also mentioned somebody that he reminds him of Emma, as far as I remember. So unlike George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, or the Brontes, whose literary reputation rests on psychological depth or philosophical inquiry, as in the case of the Dashwood sisters, the Bennet household in Pride and Prejudice, and the friendship between Catherine Morland and Isabella Thorpe in Northanger Abbey, or the intergenerational mentorship in Persuasion, Austen is often confined to the private domestic domain. Her fictional words revolve around socializing. The depiction of social relationship in the case of Austen's repertoire, however, is often dismissed as sentimental or trivial. Austen becomes to borrow the language of the popular culture, the original author of the condescending term, chicklet. Austen's novel, considered ornate, I think I'll skip all this because I don't want to be given the note. Yeah, one of Austen's most striking narrative depicts is the displacement of desire. Her heroines rarely speak their longings aloud. Elinor Dashwood's love for Edward Ferrars is contained within moral discipline. Annie Elliot's longing in Persuasion is entirely interior. Elizabeth Bennet's feels attracted, irritated, and curious towards Darcy long before she could feel any affection. In Eve Sedgwick's words, Austen structures affection through restraint rather than release. The pleasure derived by Austen's heroines ironically appears to be not consequent to passion fulfilled, but passion anticipated. The physical passion never culminates, but is postponed repeatedly. The deferred pleasure echoes Ronald Barthes' framing of narratives as a system of hermeneutic delays, where pleasure lies in the desire for the end that is endlessly suspended. The deferred moment becomes a site of aesthetic and moral values, which helps in character formation. Desire is disciplined and confined to the restraints expected with the moral tenor and norm of the 19th century philosophy. This dynamic also shapes the reader's roles. What the heroines cannot feel openly, readers are encouraged to feel intensely and experience the cycle of expectation and anticipation. The novels become emotional spaces where socially unacceptable desire is safely contained. The suspension of desire draws parallel with Keats' imagery in Ode on a Grecian Urn. I think, again, Professor Nageshwara has mentioned about the objectivity with regard to Keats. I'm mentioning some other aspect related to Keats and Jane Austen. Keats' lovers immortalized on the urn are poised in the moment of realizing a kiss. Forward, I quote, "Forward will thou love, and she be fair." The beauty of the scene is captured in the imminent kiss, forever warm and still to be enjoyed. The passion at its peak is frozen in time, as is the passion, the anticipation, the desire, and the youthful beauty, all of which will never diminish, but always be fresh and central, forever panting and forever young. The final climatic moment of union occupies the peripheral phase, is the periods and intervals of waiting and the emotional discipline that reflects the endurance, patience, and moral upbringing that occupies the central space. This renders the restraint more significant than the actualization of the much anticipated culmination of intimacy. This aesthetic model complicates the gender deception of Austen. The diatribe or myth that Austen caters to feminine readership is subverted through the Keatsian analogy, which demonstrates the fact that art is gender neutral and deeply philosophical. By confining passion to the realm of the anticipated, Austen, like Keats, highlights the paradox of life and through life, the beauty that is art. Gender reception of literature across time reveals narratives of domination and submission. One reason The Taming of the Shrew enjoyed popularity among male readers could be its unapologetic reinforcement of the idea that woman needs to be subdued, disciplined into obedience. Petruchio's Taming of Kate is not just a plot but also an affirmation that the social order remains intact. It's enjoyed and considered entertaining because it establishes male authority as socially sanctioned and stages a reassurance of male dominance, wit, and hegemony. The counter-narrative in the case of Pride and Prejudice, in the light of the tremendous popularity it enjoys among women readers, could be because of the dynamics of taming being reversed dramatically. Elizabeth Bennet does not submit. She critiques, laughs, and reasons. She is neither dazzled by wealth nor intimidated by status or rank. For the first time in the history of the English novel is the central male character Darcy, who is subjected to emotional correction, moral self-scrutiny, and a transformative humbling at the hands of the heroine. It is he who must undergo transformation to deserve her and not the other way around. It's one of the earliest and most influential examples of a hero being disciplined by a woman's intelligence and discernment. Darcy's taming is celebrated because his pride is harnessed. The taming, however, is subtle through self-introspection and refining process. It's pride that is tamed and prejudice that is forsaken and represents a radical imaginative paradigm shift from the earlier narratives where men remain unchained and it was the women who adapted. It is, however, not to be misconstrued as a victory for Elizabeth, but rather an acknowledgement of her intrinsic superiority of understanding. The reversal of the taming motive marks a profound shift in the narrative power structures and offers an imaginative empowerment to women readers which was missing in earlier literatures. Darcy conforms in response to Elizabeth's moral clarity, and her administration for her is not coercive but marked by respect. The appeal of Pride and Prejudice lies in the fact that it offers a fantasy of moral and emotional authority to women. The agent of change is a woman, and it is the man who is subjected to change. Taming is no longer a patriarchal triumph, but a dramatization of women's refusal to accept nothing less than reciprocity, respect, and equality. This structural rebalancing, the man humbled, the woman centered, makes Pride and Prejudice enduring and foundational for women's empowerment and agency. A further complication lies in Austen's male characters. They rarely embody traditional patriarchal masculinity. Edward Ferrars is hesitant and ethically conflicted. Edmund Burton is earnest but indecisive. Colonel Brandon is gentle and aging. Henry Tilney is kind and patronizing. Only Darcy initially embodies pride, authority, and autonomy, but Darcy becomes desirable only through change, through humility, apology, and emotional vulnerability. In Judith Butler's framework of gender performity, Darcy is re-scripted into a softer masculinity, one measured not by dominance but by emotional accountability. Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober argue that Austen's careful domestic worlds conceal a critique of constrained female possibility. Her narratives show the cost of being a woman in a social structure where desire must be suppressed, autonomy negotiated, and marriage remains the primary currency of survival. Though not romanticizing marriage, she exposes it as a social enterprise. Her heroines are not rewarded for passion, but for restraint. Their happiness depends not on freedom, but on correct emotional performance. Austen's fiction reveals a system in which women are refined by society and men, ironically, must be refined by women. They mirror the personal lived experiences and provides women a deeply satisfying imaginative liberation. For many readers, loving Austen becomes a ritual passed through mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts, classrooms, and book clubs. It is a shared feminine literacy. Janice Radway reminds us that reading communities are not neutral, but rather vehicles for shaping identity. Austen's novels reshape identity and shift the focus by providing centrality to the feminine sphere. This may help to explain why men historically distance themselves from Austen. The male characters, far from affirming male dominance, were depicted as adapting and yielding, which was uncomfortable and destabilizing, as emotional sphere may have been tolerable, but intellectual space to women was yet unacceptable. To love Austen is not merely to admire romance. It is to inhabit a world where gender is scripted, desire is negotiated, and emotional literacy becomes a skill rather than a liability. The gender reception of Austen works reflect a cultural truth. Austen configures the domestic fear in a manner that they become counter myths to patriarchal hegemonic literary traditions and reshapes the gendered politics of reading. Her novels soften masculinity, demand emotional intelligence, and privilege subtlety over spectacle. They ask readers, not just women, to engage with desire, irony, restraint, and vulnerability. So is Jane Austen the exclusive property of a female readership? Textually, no. Culturally, she has been made to. If male readers remain hesitant, it's not because Austen excluded them, but because our culture has not yet forgiven them for entering a feminine space without apology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your concluding presentation. I would like to thank you with a remark that men who understand and talk to women can read women, and I am one of them, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is very appreciable because the topic that he is doing is also very, women centers. He is working on the post-traumatic
Postpartum depression.
Postpartum depression, yes.
Okay, so now the floor is open now. We invite questions and comments on the presentations that we were done.
I would just like to add one point that there is a book by Sonia Kamal, Unmarriageable, since ma'am was talking about the other similar books with the similar theme and similar characters of Jane Austen. So this book is by a Pakistani writer, and she is writing from a Muslim society point of view with the same characters and same story. And I would like to add a personal note that again, nothing has changed, and the ending is same, that she has to marry in order to have a social status. And this, I would like to say, this makes me sad because again, it's difficult till date that we haven't learned to accept single mother, single woman. Till date, it's there because still the story is same. Why not the same story with a different ending? So this is something that I think I noticed, and I think this is useful for us to ponder upon, that since history and literature are similar, as history is also a reflection of society and literature is also a reflection of society, except literature is like informal, and history is like has facts to back it up. And but I feel both serve the same purpose. They are the mirror of the society. So I think we should learn from it, and we should try to change the ending maybe over the time and maybe in future. But till date, till this time, we don't see stories changing. We see the remake of the same story in different countries, different society, different characters, names, everything. But the theme and the ending is similar. And I don't know how much more time it will take for us to maybe write a different ending. That is all. And thank you so much to all the speakers. It was really informative and insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, anybody else? But yeah, we all here come here and we are talking about a woman. Things are changing.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Mehraj Mubaraki, Associate Professor, Department of Journalism. Just a footnote kind of a thing, because Jane Austen's work have also been televised and cinematized. So there was this television serial that was broadcast in Doordarshan way back in the 1980s. I mean, if you remember it well. That was Kachi Thoop. It had Ashutosh Gowarikar, who eventually went on to direct films like Lagan, that is. And of course, there was another TV serial that was broadcast in the early 90s. That was, if I'm not wrong, that was Trishna. And some time back, another cinematic adaptation was released. That was Aisha. It starred Sonam Kapoor in the lead role. Now, whether they were able to do justice or not, that is a different thing. But just as a footnote, I thought maybe I should share it with you as well. Thank you so much.
There was a topic picked up by Dr. Shilpa Anand, cultural disability. In the context of the topic today, where there is so much of emphasis on man-woman divide, acceptance divide, that's one part of the social lack of inclusion. But there is a very serious topic that most societies have continued to ignore: cultural disability, inclusion of ASD and physically, mentally disabled people. We as a society, we may be highly literate, we are highly educated. I'm sorry to address this, but there is barely any inclusion or acceptance of disability, mental or physical. And this comes from my experience of having worked with 400 autistic ASD syndrome children, their parents, the trauma the parents go through, and there's a fight which is being now put up saying, please include us in the mainstream society, don't treat us in an isolated, neglected manner. So I hope we take this message today from here. Be it man, be it woman, be it any form of inclusion, it includes a very, very important aspect of changing our minds and also changing our thought process of inclusion. Thank you.
I would like to thank each one of the panelists here for making us all realize that Jane Austen is still relevant today, and there are so many more areas to explore in her works. We have the technical session of the paper presenters starting at 2:30, so we cannot delay this round further. Thank you so much for joining us, the scholars, the guests from within and outside Manu. Thank you for being a part of this roundtable. Thank you so much.